I'm here today in the excellent studio of Matrix in Mount Cook with Dr. James Kierstead, and we are going to talk. I didn't bring a copy of the actual document, mistake. Your publication,
Neither did I, actually.
amazing grades.
Yep.
It's all right. I do have notes. So
good. That's all we need.
I know where we're going.
I've got a memory, I think.
Well, you're an academic.
Yeah.
Well, you were an academic. Let's talk about that. So before we talk about grade inflation, so what I want to talk to you today about is your report that says that particularly over the last decade, but probably going back 2 decades, there has been a substantial increase in the number of grades handed out. You have them particularly stark data on the number of A's at some point reaching 49% during the peak COVID years. But before we talk about that, let's place...
Yeah, 49% at the University of Auckland.
But that was during COVID. It's come down a little bit since then.
Yeah.
But let's talk about you first. So where you were you originally not from New Zealand? Where are you?
I was born in Canada. I was born into a Canadian Army family, so I grew up all around the world. I grew up in the Canadian Army bases in Germany, England, all around Canada.
Canada has army bases?
Canada has an army, believe it or not.
Wow.
It helped a lot, actually, in World War I and World War II, like the New Zealand Army.
But they have their own bases in Germany.
Well, they used to. They used to in the Cold War. So this is how old I am. So in the 1980s, my dad was posted there, and there weren't lots of Canadians there. There were 10,000 Canadians. I mean,
that's a lot.
Now, compared to nowadays, it's a lot. Compared to the number of Americans there were in Brits and French, it wasn't a lot.
So you actually spent time in Germany on the Canadian base?
Yeah, I spent 3 years there, when I was a little kid. So it was super interesting. And the American bases were massive. We used to go shopping in the American bases because, the families of other forces could go use the American bases for things like that. Also, like sports equipment. The Americans always had the best stuff. They still have the best stuff.
Then at some point you said you went to university, you studied at Oxford?
Yeah, so then I moved to England, and actually I did secondary school in England, and so then, if you're doing well at secondary school in England, they say, you should go to Oxford or Cambridge, so I went to Oxford and studied classics.
You must have done very well.
It was quite a sort of high-pressure situation. It was one of those schools where they're very keen on getting a certain number of students into Oxbridge every year.
Yeah.
So, I was one of those.
And why the classics? Because that would have been, your father was in the army.
Yeah, funnily enough, it was one of the broadest degrees that I could do in England, because in England, as in the rest of Europe, you really focus on one subject. You don't have all these electives like in the States or New Zealand. And so I thought, and I was already studying Latin and Greek because it was a very traditional school that I went to. So I thought, if I do classics, I can study literature, I can study 2 languages, I can study history, I can study philosophy. So that's what I did. And then the rest is ancient history. Do you have any drum effects in this?
Why though? I mean, it does seem it's almost a renaissance. It seems odd coming from a New Zealand context, but I guess not from an English context to study the classics in that way.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I think it would have seemed odd in a Canadian context too. So I guess the type of school I went to was a very traditional Anglican boarding school. Yeah. And in that world, the classics is quite high prestige. It seems weird from a New Zealand perspective because I think here, classical studies is kind of a fun subject at high school, which is actually good for us at universities because it gives us a lot of students. But in England, it's kind of seen as a very rigorous humanities discipline. Yeah. And so like a lot of prime ministers did classics at Oxford, like Boris Johnson. So funnily enough, it's the kind of thing that will actually get you, it may not get you a job in the City of London, in the financial district, but, it'll probably get you an interview.
Then you did your undergraduate at Oxford. Then you went to, was it Stanford?
Then I did a master's in ancient history at King's College London. And then I applied to Stanford during that year in London. And I had 6 years in California doing a PhD on Athenian democracy. And also studying political science. So I got really into political science at that point too. I ended up with a master's in political science as well. Because this is how academic I was at the time. I really wanted to understand ancient democracy. So I thought, I'll do all these courses on modern political science, modern political theory. And it never occurred to me at the time, this degree actually might be useful going forward. But I think it helped after I needed to get a job at a think tank just to be able to say, I actually know a bit about political science too. And it's helped me do my job at the think tank that I knew a little bit about modern political science as well.
So you did your PhD in Athenian democracy. We were speaking briefly about that last night. You said Athenian democracy, not democracy as we understand it, obviously, but still a form of democracy, only lasted for 200 years.
Yeah, it's a little bit debated when exactly it starts and when exactly it ends, but the usual definition is, between about 508 BC and 321 BC. So the reforms of Cleisthenes, who introduced, what we know and love as the classical Athenian democracy.
Yeah.
And then the Macedonians basically get rid of it after the death of Alexander the Great. Yeah, so
it must have ended at the because didn't Alexander conquer it?
Philip, the father of Alexander the Great, Philip, kind of forced all the Greek city-states into an alliance, and then he went off and conquered Persia. Then he died, and after that, a lot of the Greek city-states, led by Athens, revolted. And then Antipater, who Alexander had left in Macedonia, kind of went down into mainland Greece and sort of forced all the Greek city-states to behave.
So when Alexander was conquering Macedonia, Athens was still nominally independent, merely in alliance with Macedonia.
That's right. It was kind of, you'll be our friend, won't you, Athens? And, they knew what would happen to them if they weren't Macedon's friends. In fact, Antipater showed what would happen to them if they rejected this friendship.
What happened?
Yeah. Well, he moved in and he basically changed Athens' constitution. He introduced a property requirement, actually, for citizenship. So that was a very important principle throughout the democracy, that all you needed to do to participate in the democracy was to be a free adult male. You didn't need to have a certain amount of property. That's quite important, actually.
And then he introduced a property requirement.
Yeah, so he basically disenfranchised a lot of the citizens. He said, you need this amount of wealth or this amount of land to be a citizen from now on. And so a lot of the poorer citizens were no longer part of the...
See, I don't think that's such a bad idea. I think part of the...
Well, you're with Aristotle.
And wasn't it Karl Popper who said that the problem with democracy is it could vote itself out of existence?
Yeah, that's what he calls the paradox of democracy, yeah.
Yeah.
And that happens in Athens, actually.
And I think it's kind of happening in the West to an extent. We might come to that. Okay. At some point, you find yourself at Victoria University.
I do indeed, yeah. 2013.
And what brought you to New Zealand? The quality of the skiing?
Not the ski fields.
Medicinal cannabis?
Not that either. There was plenty of that in California. Thank you very much. And there's plenty of that in Canada too. I actually despise cannabis. Let's not talk about that.
Okay.
No, it was the academic job market. So I went on the academic job market, as you do when you finish a PhD, and then you tend to realize, oh crap, I thought I was doing well here, because you kind of continue up the academic hierarchy, and then you apply to all these jobs. I mean, I applied to 30 or 40 jobs, and I got 2 or 3 interviews, and that's typical. In fact, I was very lucky to get a job straight out of grad school. Most people nowadays do postdocs. So I applied all around the States, and my American friends were saying, oh, I've applied everywhere, but they often wouldn't apply outside of the States, because they're a little bit, I have to say, I liked America a lot, but they're a little bit parochial.
Yes.
They kind of think the States is the be-all and end-all. And so I remember I applied to, I looked at these jobs in New Zealand. One of them was in Otago. I said to my American friend, did you apply for that job at Otago? And he said, no, my wife doesn't want to move to Canada. So I applied to Vic, and I got that job.
Plugging into the stereotypes of Americans.
Yeah, and I knew a little bit about New Zealand already, mainly because I lived in England, actually. Because in England, there were more Kiwis.
Yeah.
So I knew about the All Blacks. I knew the typical kind of stereotypical stuff about New Zealand. And I thought, that sounds fun. I hear it's a beautiful country. And also, this is something I remember with great sort of amusement and bitterness. I remember thinking, well, at least there won't be all this identity politics stuff at New Zealand universities.
This was 2013.
Yeah, and it wasn't so bad when I got here.
Yeah.
But in the States, it was quite heavy. And I remember, because coming from England at the time, it hadn't hit England. I mean, Oxford was very different when I left it to what it is now. And so I went to the States, and I saw all these weird things, and all this affirmative action and so on. And then I just sort of thought, that's strange. That's an anomaly. That's not going to go anywhere else, because other people actually care about merit and things like that. And then when I came to New Zealand, within a few years, it had hit quite hard. And I think a lot of it was an importation from the States, but some of it was also homegrown. Like New Zealand has also contributed to the theory and practice of woke in a distinctive way.
I would have thought in some ways we advanced it. I think
Canada and New Zealand have played a key role, yeah.
Yeah,
I think most of it still comes from the States, but we've definitely chipped in.
Well, like giving women the vote and all this stuff, we're on the cutting edge of terrible ideas.
I don't actually. Can I just say?
Yes.
To be clear, I'm not against women having the vote. And
what?
I actually, even though they didn't do that in Athens, they didn't give them the vote in Athens. But I don't think that's woke. That's much too early. Like for me, woke was the last 5 or 6 years.
Feminism is the cause of the collapse of civilization. I mean, since we're giving women the vote, we've had 2 world wars, global warming, and S Club 7. It's terrible.
Those things have also happened since, I don't know, World War I. Like, the fact that they happened after we gave women the vote doesn't mean
I can't believe that you are seriously engaging with that.
This is what I do. This is what gets me in trouble at the university, is that when people have an idea, I just discuss it without getting offended, and that's a big problem. Yeah.
Well, feminism, because one of the existential crises that we are facing at the moment is a collapse in fertility. And I was winding my wife up the other day saying this is the result of feminism, because I interviewed Mike McRoberts on Tuesday, and one of his ancestors had 15 children. His father was, I think, the one of about 9 children or something, and you see this collapse of fertility happening all the way around the world. But I mean, 100 years ago, women didn't have an awful lot of choices, and so fertility numbers were through the roof. Now you've got all of these fantastic career choices, and then fertility is collapsing. So my theory is that feminism is an existential crisis that is ending humanity. You don't have to agree with me on that one.
No, I mean, I've heard another theory that, that people look back at the baby boom and said the baby boom isn't what we thought it was, which is just basically men coming back from the war and wanting sex and having lots of babies.
Yes.
It's more to do, if you look at the salaries, differential salaries among men and women in the 30s and 40s, basically men have much higher salaries than women. And that's kind of the ideal situation you want to be in for heterosexual mating, because women tend to be hypergamous. They look up to men.
So hypergamous?
Hypergamy is basically the female tendency to be attracted to men who are higher in status than they are. Whereas men tend to be sort of hypogamous. They want someone who's a little junior to them in some ways, usually younger, right? So the ideal situation for them to be attracted to one another is the sort of richer, more powerful man and the younger woman who depends on the man in some sense. That gets you stable marriages and babies. That's the theory.
Okay, all right. But then we see in. I was being a little bit flippant with feminism, obviously, but you also do see that with. In one of your data, I was interested to see that about 60% of the university students are female.
Yes, and that's been the case for a couple decades now, so that's interesting. I mean, we looked at the idea that just more female students would make the grades better because female students tend to do better. But actually, it's evened off over the past 10 or 20 years. So there was a huge increase in female students in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And then I think since the late 90s, around the turn of the millennium, women have been in the majority. And it's really interesting because I feel like the discourse at universities hasn't shifted at all. So we're still talking about how to make females more comfortable at university. And there are still fewer females in the top echelons of the professoriate. So full professors, there are fewer females.
But that's a function of time, isn't it?
It may be a function of time. I mean, it hasn't changed in quite a while now. I suspect it's more a function of women preferring to have children at a certain point in their career. And you can argue, if you're a feminist, you then argue, well, they need to be compensated for that because it's not their fault that they're more inclined to have children and to spend more time on the children. I think that's a reasonable argument. But I also think, like, if you're not actually doing the job and you're just looking after your children, you don't deserve to get money for doing the job, right?
If you take 10 years off, it's gonna have an impact. Okay, all right. So you spent 10 years teaching the classics to Kiwi kids. That must have been. Oh my God, that must have been a challenge. But then you left. Why did you leave? Because I think this is pertinent.
I was made redundant, strictly speaking. They told me that it was for financial reasons, strictly for financial reasons.
They must have been paying you very well.
That's a good joke, actually. No, actually, you know what, Damien? I actually think that academics do get paid reasonably well, especially in New Zealand. Like, compared to the average wage in New Zealand, we do actually get paid fairly well. Okay. And I think this is a trope that academics put out because they pretend that they're being sort of self-sacrificial and they're working on behalf of social justice. And they're actually like the rest of us, they're money grubbing.
Yes.
And I think this is one of the reasons why we don't have free speech at universities anymore, because people expect them to be all brave and sort of, revolutionary because they present themselves like that. But my experience with them has been very much that if anyone has even the slightest risk to their job from something that they're going to say, they won't say it.
Because
I've had people say to me, this whole period I've had people writing me emails saying, oh, I really admire what you're doing. You're talking about these issues at the university. I support you. However, don't mention me in any context. One person even said, I'd love to do this. However, I really want to get promoted in the next round. Right? It wasn't even like I might lose my job. It was like I might miss out on a promotion the next time I come up for promotion. And we're talking like a few $1,000s a year here. Right?
In the United States, they have a concept called tenure, which I don't really understand. But do we have a tenure means, I understand, is that you've got a sinecure that you can't get fired from except for grotesque behaviour.
Yeah, that's right.
Do we have a similar thing in New Zealand?
Yes and no. So this is interesting. Like when I had the job at Vic, I remember talking to friends of mine in the States who had academic jobs in the States or in the UK or in Canada. Well, States and in Canada is where they have tenure. And they would say to me, "Are you tenured?" And I never really knew what to say, but I would say to them, "I have an indefinite contract." So they can get rid of me at any time if they feel like they need to, but there's no set limit to my time at Vic, right? So I kind of did have tenure, and I also didn't, because tenure actually gives you more protection.
That's in the United States context.
Yeah, they can't just say, I don't think with tenure they can just say, the department has shrunk, there are fewer students, we need to get rid of you. I think, especially when you have like a named chair or something, they basically have a pot of money that just supports you and your role.
Right.
And so it's very hard to get rid of a person like that. Whereas in New Zealand, it's more like they're not going to say to you, your job is only going to last for 5 years. But if they can put forward an argument that you need to go because student numbers are down, they can do that pretty easily.
So what were you doing? What in your argument? I understand there's an ongoing issue, but why do you believe you don't believe that it was a financial issue that resulted in your termination?
I think there are some very strange features of the case. If it's true that it was just a financial issue, so one issue is that 2 of my colleagues applied for voluntary redundancy. So the university said, "Oh, we're going to make cuts in classics. We need to cut somebody." And 2 of my colleagues wrote to them and said, "Oh, we'll go. Just give us a nice package when we leave, and we'll leave." And they said, "No, not you guys." They turned them down. So it's very strange, right?
What were you saying that got you in trouble that you believe? If you're happy to answer, we can
I mean, there were a lot of things. I mean, I think I argued, the dean that was the one who got rid of me in the end, I mean, I argued with her about a few things. I remember her once saying to me that I should think about using Maturanga Maori in my research, which is on classical Athens. And I said, I'm not doing that, obviously, because I work on classical Athens. Maturanga Maori has no relevance. And she found that tough to deal with. I also remember that during COVID, I said to her, I'm going to go away because I have to see my parents. I have a father with Alzheimer's in England. And she wasn't happy about that. When I went away, she docked my wages, which is actually illegal. Or she threatened to dock my wages. And you actually have, in New Zealand, people actually have to agree to have their wages docked, which is an interesting rule. But anyway, that's the way it is. And so I made this clear to her, and she also was very unhappy about that.
Okay, all right. Then you I think I described in the column, you left Victoria University perhaps somewhat reluctantly, and you now work for the New Zealand Initiative, which is part of the global Atlas network of maligned think tanks. So
apparently so, although, as you may know, the total amount of money we've gotten from Atlas, the total amount of stuff we've gotten from Atlas is 1 camera. So if they're trying to be like a nefarious network, super rich network funding all these think tanks, they're not doing a very good job.
Yeah, where's my cohort? Damn it! Yeah. Now, one of the projects, so the reason why I wanted to talk to you, and I've written a column on this already, was grade inflation. You start off, you're talking about your own experiences as a teacher in Vic, and you describe that you're under pressure, must not fail over 20% of your students. You required an 80% pass rate.
That's right. Yeah, that's an interesting thing in itself because I put that in the report. I had lots of other academics that I wrote to and said, can you tell me your experiences of grade inflation? Or, do you have any pressure to grade in a particular way? And a lot of them said, I was told that I had to pass 85% of students, 80% of students, 75% of students. So I was getting the same report from all these people who were saying, I was told that the TEC, the Tertiary Education Commission, would cut our funding if I passed fewer than this number of students, but the number was always different. And I tried to track it down, the number on the TEC website. I couldn't find it. So it may be that there's actually no rule, but lots of people seem to believe that this is a thing, and lots of academics are being told that they have to pass a certain percentage of students.
So you actually talk about this a bit later in the report that there is at least there is a perception that funding is linked to student numbers. That intuitively makes sense. But then getting student numbers is linked to grades. We'll come to that. I'm jumping ahead. what we're talking about now is just the empirical evidence that there is grade inflation. Perhaps first let's define what grade inflation is, because it's a little bit different from we think about monetary inflation where there is no upper cap.
Exactly.
In grade inflation, there is an upper cap because you can't get higher than an A+, although perhaps the British actually came up with.
Yeah, so GCSE and A-level, the two main state exams at secondary schools in the UK, there used to be just an A in both sets of exams. And then when I did my GCSEs, there was an A star. And then when I did my A-levels, there was just an A. But then after I did my A-levels, they introduced an A star, which is really annoying for me, right? Because now I say, look, I got 4 A's at A-levels. It's pretty good, eh? And then, of course, nowadays there are all these people who got 4 A stars at A-levels. So that's classic grade inflation, right? Because it's kind of like monetary inflation in that you work hard to get your dollars, and then things change, and then your dollars are worth less than they used to be.
Yep.
So it's kind of like that. You work hard to get your A's, and then things change, and then usually there's not an extra grade. Usually there's just more A's in the system. And so people look at your transcript or your CV, and they're like, oh, you got A's, but so did everybody else.
So you define grade inflation as an increase in grades without any underlying cause for it. No improvement in underlying student achievement.
That's right. So we say grade inflation, and this is something that other researchers say as well. It's a pretty standard definition by now. Grade inflation is when grades increase with no corresponding increase in student performance. So obviously, if there are more A's, but then we have good evidence to believe that the students, or all the students who got the A's deserve those A's, then that's not a problem. That just means you're doing a really good job teaching the students.
So let's just talk about how dramatic it is. So there is, you show that, I think it's in New Zealand data, the most common grade was a C, and the A's have gone from about 15% now to about 45% of all of the grades handed out are A's. There has consistently, not just in New Zealand, but globally, there has been an increase.
Did you say 45?
45%.
I think it's about 35. It's over 30 at, I think, all or most of the New Zealand universities now. But during COVID, it was definitely, most of the universities, it was in the 40s or high 40s. Yeah.
So what we are seeing is from the 50s to today, a steady increase, not just in New Zealand, this is a global problem, but there has been a steady, gradual and consistent increase in the number of students getting A's relative to what they have in the past, and a particular spike in COVID.
Yeah, so globally, I didn't do like a whole global survey of grade inflation. What I usually look at in my reports is just comparable nations in the English-speaking world. Mm-hmm. And the evidence is a little bit patchy, but I can say for sure that in the United States and in the UK, there's very good evidence on grade inflation. In the UK, they track it every year now. And we know that the grades have increased. In the UK, it's the degree class, so whether you get a first-class degree or 2-1 or whatever, but it's essentially grade inflation. In Canada and Australia, the evidence isn't so hot. There's not that many studies. I did a podcast recently, as you know, with these two Australian academics who are doing a study at Sydney. That's actually the only one I found in Australia. But anyway, so in the English-speaking world, at least the US and the UK, we have pretty solid evidence that there's grade inflation. I don't know about the rest of the world. So it may be that this is just an Anglophone university problem. And there are things about English-speaking universities or universities in the English-speaking world which have been peculiar for the last few decades. And we see other problems like administrative bloat, which seem to be worse in the English-speaking world than in the rest of the world.
Because you also, you talk about Harvard, which I like this. 45% of grades were A's in 2012. And by 2023, it was just under 80%. At Harvard. Did you ever see the TV program Suits?
No, it's the one with Meghan Markle, though. I know that.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, it is with the. Yep, that's true. But one of the jokes in the film, in the TV series, is that they only hire lawyers from Harvard. But that may not work quite so well now if Harvard's giving away. Well, Harvard's got its own other problems as well, of course.
Well, this is the thing. Harvard and Yale both have around 80% A's, so there's a lot of debate about like what universities actually do. And one theory by mainly economists is that having a university degree just signals to employers that you're industrious and intelligent, i.e. you're hardworking and you're smart. So if Harvard and Yale can still get that message across, then they're probably going to be safe. And so they can afford to inflate grades partly because they have such a prestigious name, but partly because they're quite selective with the students that they accept.
Well, is that still the case? There's been quite a bit of discussion in the last 2 or 3 years that Harvard's, the DEI program, diversity has resulted in a considerable drop in the quality of the applicants coming through.
Yes, if you're white or you're Asian and you go to Harvard or Yale, you're probably doing extremely well. You're probably very bright. Because not only have you gotten into Harvard and Yale, but you've done it and you've been discriminated against in applications. I mean, it's the same with Oxford. Like if you went to a private school, you got into Oxford, you're likely to be extra bright because you're discriminated against in the application process.
Okay, all right. That's okay. It's good to know. All right. Well, because when I started my column, I made reference to I was interviewing law graduates. And they came in with pretty good grades. And I'm interviewing these people because I've been employing lawyers for 20 years. And one of my questions is, name a case that you really enjoyed, a litigation case. And 10 years ago, you get all sorts of random answers and, some people would suck up by quoting one of mine. But then the answers got worse and worse, and in a recent case, I was reduced to name a case, any case, and often the only answer they can come up with is the snail in the Coke bottle, and they couldn't even name the case, none of you versus Stevenson. I don't know what they're teaching these people, but when I'm looking at the grades...
Teaching them about the snail in the Coke bottle, obviously. That's the one thing. Yeah.
But, yeah, it's just, oh my God. But they didn't... Looking at the grades, if they had come in with C's and D's, that would have made sense to me. But they were coming in with A's and B's, and I was flummoxed by the. So now we do our own, because you talk about solutions. I'll come to that. Psychometric testing is one of the private sector solution to it, because you come from a university. So as you say, what does a university tell an employer? A university degree tells an employer that you can do 4 years, you can follow rules, and you've got stickability and durability, right? And you've got some degree of competence. That was true 20 years ago. It's not true now. You get a university degree is potentially no more than a participation trophy. And so whether the private sector solution is potentially, we'll come to that. I'm jumping ahead.
No, but this is exactly what the theory predicts, right? That, universities should be able to signal to employers. They should be able to give an accurate signal to employers of the quality of various graduates. They're not doing that. And so that actually passes the cost of determining who's actually bright and who's actually industrious to the employer. So the employers then have to do things like figure out their own psychometric testing. So it increases costs on everybody else to figure out who's actually a good candidate.
I have another theory on that, which I'll come to.
Anyway, I want to say one thing about your experience, which is very striking. You're talking about law graduates, and law graduates are like the elite in New Zealand. So, and actually...
The inflation hasn't been quite so bad in law.
Exactly. We broke it down by different disciplines, and law was the one that all the way through the period had the lowest percentage of A's.
Yeah.
It could be that means that the law students are all thickos. They're not getting A's because they're just not smart. But we have other reasons to believe that they're especially smart because they're selected for. And also, just anecdotally, when I taught classics at honors level, I often had people who were doing joint law and classics, and they were usually the brightest students in my class. So I think they probably are quite smart in law. It's just that because they don't have to kind of go after students because they're going to get student numbers anyway because everyone wants to do law, they don't have to prostitute themselves in the same way by giving out all these A's.
I actually think that the quality of legal education is declining, but that's a separate issue.
No, I mean, if you think that's the case, even with lawyers, then it suggests that, even in the area where they have the smallest problem with grade inflation, there's still an issue. I think that's probably...
Yeah, I think I think that the quality of the education these kids are getting is less than what it was 20 years ago. Let's talk about possible reasons. So you've demonstrated empirically that grades are rising. You give 4 possible reasons. Better quality of students coming to the NCEA, more female students. It's shockingly sexist of you. Increase in revenue per student and better student-to-teacher ratio. You looked at all 4 of these and none of them were compelling.
We didn't really think that those were going to be the reasons for the rises in grades. We just wanted to do our homework because we knew people on the other side, like at the university, were going to say, "Oh, we're just doing a great job," or like there are reasons why the students are just getting better. We don't actually know any academic who thinks that the students have improved. Like no one privately will tell you, oh, the students are much better nowadays. Everyone privately will tell you, oh, the students are a lot worse. But when we put out the report, of course, Universities of New Zealand comes out and says, oh, the teaching is just so good these days, right? So we wanted to do our homework and just consider some of the factors that feature in other reports. And you do have to do your homework, right? And some of these other reports look at these features quite commonly, these possible causes like more females. And so we just wanted to sort of see if they held up. And in the end, I think we've sort of knocked them down pretty effectively.
So if we have a look, I particularly liked you had the NCEA analysis, and then you graphed the internal and the external assessments. The internal assessments, they all did really well. The external assessments, which obviously were a bit more objective, and they weren't as, which I think
that's kind of a microcosm of how grade inflation works in its own right, because the internal assessments are just graded by the teachers. That's my understanding anyway. And the external assessments, they're actually assessed in this process, which my colleague Michael Johnston had a role in designing, where they do a lot of moderation. So they work really hard to make sure the grades aren't going to inflate. And, or at least not
define moderation in that context.
I can't remember what they actually do, but I think they sort of give the scripts to a panel of examiners, and they get them to justify any departure from like the previous year's curve. So basically, they expect a certain number of A's, and if the A's are like within a certain band, statistical band, and if the A's are like wildly above that, they go to the committee and they say, what's up with this year? And it could be that the committee says, oh, there's a very good reason, the students are just performing better. But anyway, they do a lot of work to make sure that the grades are accurate. And so then what you get is the NCA internal results going up and up. And also we have another benchmark to judge whether those internal results actually reflect reality. And that's the PISA scores. So they're international organizations that track student performance. And we've done this in other New Zealand initiative reports, like one by Briar Lipson a few years ago, where you can graph like NCA internal assessments. Again, they just go up and up. So NCA is saying our students are doing much, much better at math, they're doing much better at literacy. And then PISA says, no, you're doing worse, right? So that's interesting.
All right. So we looked at the quality of NCEA students. We looked at that's the other interesting thing, not relevant to this, but the female students, the percentage of female students in New Zealand universities. There was a spike at World War I. There was another big spike at World War II, which dropped back down. It took to the mid-70s before the percentage of female students got back to where it was in World War II.
That's super interesting. So I actually think like the feminists, like the traditional kind of left liberal view that the 50s was a bad time for female emancipation seems to be accurate, right? Because it's like the percentage of women in universities in New Zealand is actually reasonably high, like in the 1910s.
But no, that's not the data I took. I assume that was because the men weren't going to university, that the number of women would have been the same. It was just that the number of men had fallen.
I mean, in the world wars, that's true. Yeah. So maybe the 50s, there's some effect of the war still. It's possible.
Yeah. So the guys came back.
But I mean, the female percentage is quite high just before World War I, which is interesting as well. Like it's higher than you might expect. It's not like there were very few women going to university, or the percentage of women was very low before World War I, and then it plummeted even further. It's like it's sort of doing reasonably well in the pre-war period, and then anyway, but. Yeah,
I thought that. I thought that was interesting, but then in the last 25 years, the percentage of female students peaked, pushed over 50%, and is now sitting just under 60%, and that's been pretty stable for a couple of decades now. So you're saying that it's not an increase in female students?
Yeah, so the female student numbers don't justify the increase in grades that we've seen over the past 20 years, right? Because they're kind of flatlined, and the percentage of A's is going up.
I did raise the possibility that it might be also because the migration into New Zealand in the last 2 decades, we've seen a large number of migrants from India and Southeast Asia, and certainly anecdotally, that the students of immigrants, particularly from those parts of the world, do tend to perform better. So but there would be very little explanatory power on that, I would have imagined, very much at the margin.
There are relatively few international students, and I guess it depends.
No, not international students. People who migrate here from Malaysia.
If they're migrating and they're getting here, and the students are going all the way through the school system, then you have the problem that the proper NCA results, like external assessment, aren't going up. So it's like they get here and they're East Asian or they're Indian, and they're not doing very well at school, and then they suddenly do really well at university. Right?
Well, maybe it's those migrant students are actually lifting the PISA scores, and if you were to take them out, the PISA scores from the locals would be even worse.
May well be.
Somewhat disconcerting. Yeah. Thank God for Tiger Mums. More money per student, which you show that was flat and actually potentially falling since 2019, and the staff-teacher ratios are static. The number of people employed by the universities is going up, but not necessarily academic teaching staff. So, so that's where we've got to. We've seen that it's happening, and we have been unable to find any explanatory power. So why is it? Why are grades going up?
Grades are going up because academics are giving out high grades in order to keep their student numbers up. Because academics in New Zealand are terrified of having their jobs cut, or positions in their programs cut, positions occupied by their friends, if their student numbers go down. That's the main reason. Another thing is that if you give out high grades, you tend to get good student feedback.
Yep.
And student feedback is really important nowadays for promotion.
You had a nice little graph, and I think it's a fun thing to kick around. Excludable and non-excludable, rivalous and non-rivalous. And so this is where you're working in the tragedy of the commons. So this is where you are saying the cost to grade inflation is real. And so you say you can have a private good that is rivalrous, and I think you use a Mandarin as an example. So this is something that's mine. This is my phone. It's mine. It's a private good, and I can stop other people getting it.
Yeah, you put the Mandarin in your desk drawer. Other people can't eat it, right?
Yep.
So it's rivalrous in that sense that I can prevent other people from consuming it.
Then you have club goods, which are non-rivalrous but excludable.
That's right.
An example uses Netflix.
That's right. So you get a Netflix subscription, then you can use it. What do you say?
So if I'm the owner of Netflix, the more people who read, it's like a podcast. If I was to put the podcast behind a paywall,
that's the excludability bit.
I can exclude people from it, but the marginal cost is close to zero.
Yeah, but it's not non-rivalrous in the sense that I can watch the podcast or the Netflix show. It doesn't mean that there's less of the Netflix show for anybody
to go
else.
around.
That's it.
Then you've got public goods, which are non-rivalrous and non-excludable. You just say it air.
So clean air, maybe unpolluted air.
And then we have non-excludable, rivalrous goods. This is where we get to the tragedy of the commons. This is a good that there is a conflict in incentives. So it is in the incentive of the individual to use that good, but if everybody takes that approach, then the good itself becomes damaged.
Yeah, so the classic tragedy of the commons, as you know, but maybe say it for the listeners, is just that there's a common, there's like a bit of grass in the center of an English village, and people dispute whether this actually happened historically, but it's just a way of thinking about it. And I have cows or sheep. Everyone in the village has cows or sheep, and I can just graze my cows and sheep as much as I want on the common. And for me, that's always good, right? I want my cows and sheep to be bigger. I want more cows and sheep, so I keep grazing my animals. Results, if everybody does that, is that there's no more grass on the field, and we're all worse off.
And grade inflation, integrity in grades is in effect a form of a common good. So
that's what we're arguing. Sound grading is what we call it. So grading that's sort of accurate and uninflated, shall we say. Kind of like sound money. We're trying to use we're trying to extend the metaphor from monetary.
I think it's a stretch, but I understand. So
it's like great, because dollars. If you have sound money, then dollars retain their power.
Yes.
And if you have sound grading, then A's retain their power to signal. Right.
Yeah, the power to signal. So that's a really important thing as an employer, or as the student themselves. If you get a B, that is giving you information. It's just telling you where you sit in the hierarchy. If everybody gets an A, then nobody then the A's become meaningless. There is no explanatory power in the grades that come through. And so whilst it is in my interest as an academic to hand out more A's, that benefits me, it damages the commons, and this situation is sound grading.
Exactly.
Is that the argument?
Exactly. So one of the ways of looking at it is it's a kind of sweet sort of secret deal between academics and students. The academics are saying to the students, hey, kids, take my class, and I'll give you these sweet A's, right? Yep. And it sort of cheats the rest of society. Ultimately, it cheats the students as well. Because, the top students who work really hard are getting A's that are useless, and you're not motivating the other students to work hard because they're all going to pass anyway. But that's kind of one way of looking at it. I think the word corruption is too strong for this, but it's a little bit of a corrupt way of going about it. It's kind of like, I want more student numbers, I'm going to give out more A's, and I'm not going to worry so much about whether these A's actually reflect true student performance.
Because the downstream costs is not borne by the academic handing out the cheap A's.
Exactly, not in the short term. So that's why it's also like the tragedy of the commons. So in the short term, I can graze my animals as much as I want. There's always going to be, it looks like there's always going to be grass there. Yeah. But if everyone does it, then there's not. So in the same way, I think as an academic, I can just give out A's, nothing's going to happen. Over the long term, you get a situation like at the University of Auckland in 2020 when 50% of all the grades awarded are A's. And then at a certain point, so in the long term, at a certain point, surely, and I think this is probably happening now, it's starting to happen, society is going to look at this and be like, this is just not credible. It's not serious. And then you get the problem with these employers who are kind of like, okay, it says you have an honors degree or even a master's degree from New Zealand University, but I don't care. I'm just going to do my own psychometric testing, and maybe I'm going to hire the person who never went to university, but I have better evidence that they're bright.
But this is because this is so interesting. This leads into there is an argument going around, popularized by the late Charlie Kirk, that university is a scam, which I think is overselling it. But we have certainly seen you go back over the last 50 years, the number of people, I don't have the data to hand, you might do, but the percentage of the population going to university and tertiary studies has expanded enormously.
Yeah.
So not only do we having grade inflation, we're actually having qualification inflation. So jobs that you only needed some form of basic literacy 40 years ago, you now need a university degree. And jobs that 20 years ago you need a university degree, you now need a postgraduate degree.
Yeah.
So we've actually got two things happening at the same time.
Yep.
Well, not at the same time. First you had qualification inflation, and now we've got grade inflation.
Yeah, they sort of go hand in hand, though, I think, because, people have said to me it's not the case that employers look at transcripts that much, and I think that's probably true. But I think they probably do look at things like, have you got an honors degree or have you got a master's degree? And traditionally, you only got to the honors level or the master's level if you had good grades. So basically, grade inflation can lead to you having more qualifications.
Right.
But one of the fun things about qualification inflation is that basically what it does is that it means that people from bourgeois families, people from middle-class families who have a lot of capital to invest in education, they can give you that qualification that then gets you all of these jobs, not only in the traditional white-collar world, but also basically it's now becoming a requirement for lots of things, right, for kind of lower-tier management jobs that you didn't used to need a qualification for.
Yeah.
So it's basically functions as a way for the bourgeoisie to kind of force other people out of jobs, or like force them further back in the queue to get jobs. So you can see it as a very sort of
theft protection, almost class. It's the embediment of in the class. It's like the Dalit system. Where you fit in the hierarchy.
And I think, studying universities for the past few years, I've become convinced that it's a lot about class. Because people know the New Zealand Initiative is often going to put out, Marxist analysis of things, and this is what I thought with administrative bloat as well, is that you get this trend whereby a lot of the non-academic workers at universities, they used to be blue-collar workers, they used to be cleaners and stuff. Those people are groundspeople. These people are all being outsourced, and now you get more and more managers. And there's no real explanation for this because a lot of them don't really do anything useful. And I think the best explanation is something like people like to hire people who are kind of like them, and they dress the same way and they have the same opinions. And it kind of makes them feel like our side is doing well, and it's reassuring. That's maybe a little bit loose, but I think there's something like that going on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. You proffer some solutions. Let's run through them quickly. Moderation, which is essentially you're talking about external assessments, where the Because I think you talk about your experience at Oxford where the people doing the grading are not the people who do the teaching.
Yeah, that's right. And that's not just Oxford. I mean, that system functions at a lot of European universities. So, you're taught, the way it works at Oxford is you're taught in a college, which is part of the university, by tutors who are really academics because they have strange language for everything at Oxford. But basically, like, someone teaches you Greek history, and then at the end of your degree, you go do a Greek history exam, which is set by the university. So it's set by a committee of academics. And it could be that your tutor is on that committee, but when you write the exam, it's anonymized. And so there's a big pile of exams, and your tutor's going to be marking like some of these scripts. But nobody knows which one is which.
But there's still the pressure within Oxford to hand out more, even though it's a federal type system within that small environment. There's still they want to have out more grades than Cambridge or whatever it is. So,
maybe there's some effect like that. I mean, yeah, that's probably changed a bit in the last couple of decades. Like, I think when I was there, universities still prided themselves on being tough.
Yeah.
I think that was part of the culture. But I mean, at least that system removes some of the incentives that you get when you allow teachers literally to mark their own work. Okay, maybe not literally their own work, but like the work of their students.
Yeah.
Because like
because their teaching is the work. So what the students produce,
it kind of is. Yeah.
That is the outcome of their product.
Yeah. So, but also things happen when you're teaching. Like sometimes it's happened to me like 1 or 2 times. You sometimes like the students that you're teaching, right? So then you think, oh, I want this person to do well. You think maybe this is going to reflect well on me if they do well. And so there's an incentive to give them better grades. And so you remove that as soon as you create a separation between the teaching and the instruction and the grading. So that's very important, I think.
So, but that seems to be a relatively, I mean, I realize it's kind of a sovereign risk issue because if New Zealand becomes known for being tough grading. But that doesn't, because you get several other ideas, Z-scores and class averages and ranking so you know where you fit in the class. But why can't just like they do with NCA, say, okay, all right, for all those, we are going to the Economics Association, whatever the universities can say, right, we are going to set, these 4 people are going to set the examinations for physics, for engineering, for law, whatever. And just to have anonymized nationwide, why can't that does not seem a difficult, there might be a
I agree with that. This is basically, that's one of the solutions that I was pushing in this, have a nationwide disciplinary exams.
Yeah.
They do this in Germany, they're called Staatsexamen for a certain number of subjects. We're kind of familiar with them for things like law, where they have bar exams. My understanding is that our exams in law are not quite like that in New Zealand because you do this course instead and it has some assessment. But it's not like you just go to do this in person.
Oh, no, you're talking about the professionals. No, that's...
Yeah. I think it's softer here, right?
Yeah, no, you would have to work really hard to fail.
Exactly. So I think we should have tough national level exams. I mean, so Michael Johnston, who helped me with the report, he doesn't really like this solution, partly because he thinks it's just going to be a mess trying to sort out what's in the national exams. Everyone's going to wrangle about it. And also, in some universities, like even if it's the same department. So, for example, in the classics department at Otago, I know they do a lot of archaeology. They do more history and archaeology. We at Vic used to do more sort of language and literature and things like that. So, in some departments they're going to teach, and in some maths departments they're going to do more geometry, and some they're going to do more real analysis or whatever. So, you got to make sure that everyone agrees what's on the exam, and some people are going to feel annoyed if there's like not enough archaeology in the exam. I see these as kind of practical issues that can be hammered out. And I think if the problem, like in New Zealand, they're probably going to be academics who are kind of like, but I think archaeology is more important or something, and all these kind of...
But these are subjective assessments that if we were doing the assessments in something like economics, well, still a bit subjective, but physics, mathematics, law, you could... That would be, and particularly for the larger disciplines, I don't see that as a realistic objective. Sure, okay, I can understand in classics and philosophy and so forth.
No, I mean, even in law, there's going to be an argument like what's more important, torts, or, I mean, I don't even know law well enough to know what the individual subfields are, but there's always that argument. I just think it's a practical issue, and they somehow managed to solve it in Germany, right? And they solve it whenever there's a bar exam, which is basically every state in the U.S., right? There's always the issue of like what's most important to go into the bar exam, and somehow they manage that problem. They make it work. Yeah.
Well, because I mean, really, the bar exam, as I understand, is more a test of your ability to learn, remember, and intelligence. That's kind of the way it works. But maybe in a way, it's a good thing, because if it damages the reputation of the universities overall, maybe more people will stop going to them, because I think we are over-educating our children. We are pushing more and more people towards useless degrees, and they will be better off getting trades. Or just not doing some of these qualifications. The number of people I see coming through with tertiary qualifications in business, and they know nothing. That is an utter waste of time.
Yeah,
you could take them in from 17 might be young. You can take them in from 1920 and say, right, here you go, bang, and you're learning on the job, and they are. I mean, I did economics, and sure, I mean, some of the concepts stick in my head, but I mean, I don't think I use much of my qualification.
I don't know. I think you're kind of doing yourself down there. I think it comes across in your columns, and you know the equation for inflation and things like that. You probably learned that at university, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
You know about public goods and private goods. I mean, I think you do. I don't think the signaling model of education is wholly right. I think it has signaling has an important role to play in education and how universities work, but it's not the whole thing. I think people do learn some things. If I was Universities New Zealand sitting here, I would say to you, we did an analysis. Universities of New Zealand did an analysis in 2016, so quite a long time ago now, but that there's a graduate premium, and I think they'll tell you there's still a graduate premium in New Zealand. And graduate premium is basically the amount of money you make that's over and above what people without a degree make. So I think it's still the case in New Zealand that over the course of your lifetime.
Bias.
In what sense?
This is smart people go to university.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the interesting thing. I think it's still the case now that people with a degree earn more money. Now, the question is that because they went to university, or is it because university traditionally has been really the only way that you can, signal that you're smart and industrious and you're middle class, but also it's the only way that you learn anything. Because in the past, it was very hard to get to information. It was all shut up in libraries, only a few people were educated. And nowadays, it's not like that. And I think the universities have been suicidal in the past 10 years or so because they've been doubling down on all these things that makes people hate them in an environment where really, lectures are cheap now. Like, lectures are free. You can go on YouTube and find lectures that are much better than a lot of the stuff you get at Vic.
Yeah.
And you can also get, and nowadays, more recently, you can get AI to kind of design assessments for you and test you on material. I've done this myself. I'm trying to learn various things like R coding, right? And Claude is a very good tutor. I don't need to go to the university. So I think that what we're going to see in the next few years...
But somebody has to write the AI.
Yeah, exactly.
Therein lies the problem, right?
No, but I mean,
it's the chicken and the egg.
All those things. Ultimately, I think the technology will be good enough that it's going to be putting out coders. It's going to not only be able to code itself, it's going to be able to produce people who can code AI, who can create AI machines. And you won't have to go to university for that because there'll be like online modules you can do. At the moment, it doesn't seem credible because there's a credentialing problem that if you get a degree from Vic, still, amazingly, employers will think like, oh, I might take a punt on this guy. Whereas if you say like, I did this course on Udemy, that's like seen as a bit lower. But I actually think we're going to be moving into a world where, there's a dev academy in Wellington. The tech world is kind of...
Sorry?
There's a coding academy in Wellington that one of my friends went to, and she just decided to retrain as a coder. She didn't think about going to the university. She just went to this private academy and did like an intensive course in coding and got a job straight out of that. Right. So I think there's going to be a lot more stuff like that in the future. And the thing about universities is that basically they're saying to you, oh, you want to be a coder? Okay, come here and we'll force you to do Spanish. So they pack it, which I kind of used to like because I'm a humanist, right? But it's basically forcing my preferences on everybody else.
That's a really good description.
They get you to buy this whole package, right? You go into a cafe and say, can I have a coffee? They're like, sure, you have to order a meal, right? Which sometimes, actually, they do that with alcohol and Easter.
Yeah.
But it's like that the whole time, right?
Part of the reason why I end up employing graduates is because it is this smart people end up going to university. I employed somebody recently, and we had a number of quite impressive applicants come through the door. This individual went to what I knew was a really rubbish high school, and then they'd gone to university, and they'd done reasonably well at university, and that impressed me.
Yeah, that's logical. Yeah.
That was because I remember many years ago, I employed somebody else. She'll know who I'm referring to if she gets as far. She went to AUT, which was a very new law school. But she'd arrived from a foreign country with almost no English, and you could just see she just got into law school, barely got into law school, and then you saw her grades in the first year were rubbish, better, and then exceptional. You can just see this was a really bright individual, and so from that, if you look hard enough, you can actually see the signal through the noise. But you've got to look, and I think the universities are making it harder and harder to pick up on that signal, which is why private psychometric testing is now becoming more.
Yeah, I mean, even with that student, if you see that initially she's getting, I don't know, B's or something, and then she's getting A's at the end, there are several reasons why she might be getting an A, right? She might be getting an A because she's really bright. She also might be getting an A because everybody gets an A. Or like, in law, not so much, but in other subjects, if you're getting an A, it means basically you're in the top third of the distribution. Right, so that it means you're probably not.
But the grade inflation would not have kicked off in the 3 years that she was doing it. But in her situation, it was language. So the first year that she was there, her English would have been rubbish. By the third year, her English would have been much better. And with English comes the ability, comprehension. You don't have to work as hard to understand. And so when I was looking at that, I was thinking, wow, here is somebody who is, and so.
Yeah,
but that's
plausible. But what you're saying is you had to go to a lot of work to kind of make sure that she was a good candidate, whereas you should just be able to look at the grades or the level of degrees she's earned and be like, this is obviously a smart cookie.
Yeah. But I think that the signals coming through from the university are so, and that's why we have that psychometric testing now. People are doing their own research, and I think there's kind of a general culture of malaise within the universities that I think is a wider problem, but
yep. Well, the general culture. Well, it's a negative culture in a lot of different ways, but that would be like a whole podcast series. So.
What was it? Somebody made the joke. I can't remember. It was a TV program. So why are the debates in academia so bitter? Because
the stakes are so low.
The stakes are so low.
Yeah.
But that might not be true of what you were saying before.
I actually think that we've gotten this wrong. I think that's what academics tell us about them, that they're these kind of like monk figures and they're kind of being relatively austere and just they're working on behalf of social justice. You can see it in a different way. They actually have like incredibly secure jobs, right? Even the indefinite positions of Vic, like it's my understanding in the private sector, it isn't usually the case that people just say, you just have a job for like an indefinite amount of time and you'll just have it for life probably. So they have incredibly good job security. And so to some economists, the fact that economic salaries are slightly lower is just, it's compensating for the fact that they just have, such enormous job security. So one way of looking at it is that they're all securing sinecures for themselves, right? And they're telling us that they're doing this for our own good. But the elite classes that have had sinecures as priests or whatever for centuries have always told us that they're doing this for our good. And you might want to think, actually, maybe the academic, because they all have these theories that they're constantly telling us that we should look at people's self-interest. It's all class interest and stuff like that. So, okay, let's just apply that analysis to academics.
Because where I think it becomes tricky is that for those academics, their skill set has been narrowed to the point that outside of academia, they are unemployable. So you've done particularly, your skill set is obviously not so limited because you've branched out and you found a career outside of academia. But I think for a lot of people inside academia, there is a real fear that if they were to lose that profession, that sinecure, they will be unable to get a comparable income elsewhere. And
exactly. That's it. It's the comparable income thing, though, because I hear a lot of academics complaining, and I was like this to some extent, too, probably because I was a classicist, but like, oh, I'll never be able to get another job. I think academics do actually tend to get other jobs, right? That's not the problem. The problem is that they don't have the kind of job that gives them the same social status and the same income. And that, again, sheds a lot of light on the true situation. The true situation isn't that, oh, woe is me, I won't get another job, so I can't speak out. It's, I don't want to speak out because I don't want to lose any social status or income.
Do you feel your social status has fallen since you work for the initiative?
Maybe not mine so much, but I mean, I think that, had I gotten another job, which was sort of lower down the pecking order or something. I think this is what academics are really afraid of, basically, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I think to a certain extent, those fears are illusory because I think academics also tend to be more anxious than the average bear. But
I don't think they are illusory. I've met a number of academics over the years, and most of them, after they've been in the institution for a decade, they are unemployable for almost all there's a very small number of academics who go on to create careers for themselves outside of academia. I think people like Tom Holland and so forth, who and what's that famous guy, Jordan Peterson, Neil Ferguson. There is a very small market for academics to make a life separate, but there are so few opportunities.
Well, actually, it's a good thing. I mean, I haven't looked into this empirically, but you should just take like the set of ex-academics somehow and look at their earnings and things. I actually think that they wouldn't do badly compared to the average person, just because they tend to be highly educated.
It depends how long they're in the university.
But I agree. Obviously, it's going to differ by subject. But I know academics who said to me, I can't speak out, woe is me. I don't have any applicable skills. And I say, oh, you're like a quantitative social scientist with a lot of computer skills. Don't you think that'll be saleable? And they're like, oh, no one wants me. So I think some of it's a bit exaggerated.
Okay. Well, I think we've ripped through your life history, your academic career, and why universities suck.
Oh, we have a lot more to go on that if you want future episodes. But
we might come back and do some more on those. Dr. Kierstead, thank you so much for writing the report on amazing grades. It was a really interesting report, and it kind of confirmed. I was kind of aware of it, but not. But after you wrote the report, it was kind of like the light turned on, and I said, okay, all right. So shining a light on that problem, I think, was a really powerful and useful thing to do, and that's why more people should join the initiative. I'll pay for James's salary.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I definitely say A+ for this podcast. See, now you don't trust me, right? Because you think, what's an A+? Why isn't he giving me an A star? But yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks, James. Thank you.